guys, welcome back to Sister Sister, a podcast for spiritual baddies. So today we're talking about Wicca, specifically the dark history of Wicca and how it was created. I'm not gonna go too much into details because Elle's gonna give us the tea on that, and then we're gonna eat our popcorn and talk about it. So you might need popcorn or tea or something for this one. We'll just say that.
Also buckle up because this is going to be a long episode. I also will shout out at the beginning of this, another podcast, Spiritually Connected. She goes even further into detail into some like more graphic things that I personally don't feel comfortable speaking about because of my own trauma. Um, but if it's
Drama.
something that you would be interested in, definitely go check out her episode about Wicca because she really dived very deep into it. But just like a little bit of background, also the dark history of Wicca is something I feel very passionately about. So this is going to be a long one. um, but we'll just start with Wicca and like where it came from. So Wicca was first given its name by Gerald Gardner's book in 1954, called Witchcraft Today, in which he called it Wicca, but it was only spelled with one C. The extra C ended up being added in the 1960s. So, according to Gardner, the word was derived from the Scots English and meant wise people. Gardner, considered to be the founder of Wicca, was born in 1884 in Liverpool, England, the north part of it. And he was a world traveler with interest in the occult. So Gardner first heard the word Wicca used in the 1930s when he became involved with a coven in Highcliffe, England. He was initiated, I'm losing my spot in our document, initiated into the group in 1939. In 1946, Gardner bought land in the village of Bricket Wood to establish a center for folkloric study that would serve as the headquarters for a coven of his own. He ended up dying of a heart attack in 1964 while on board a ship off the North African coast. He was buried, and only the ship's captain attended his funeral. In 1973, his extensive personal collection of artifacts was sold to the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum. So that is a little bit about Gerald Gardner, who is considered one of the fathers of Wicca. But then we also have Aleister Crowley. Would you like to talk about Aleister Crowley and the interesting man he was, Maya?
Absolutely. So Gardner met this guy Crowley in 1947, and when Gardner formally wrote out the Wiccan rituals, he drew strongly from Crowley's practices and beliefs that had dated originally back to 1912. So the two men had really similar ideas, and Crowley in 1914 proposed the idea of forming a new religion that would pull from old pagan traditions of worshipping the earth, celebrating equinoxes, solstices, and other hallmarks of nature-based worship. This is all you can find this on history.com. As you guys know, we do our research on stuff when we're not just spewing nonsense, so we should have added that in the beginning as well. Um, and now we kind of want to go into like some of the things that Wicca culturally appropriated because it didn't just pull from paganism, it pulled from other religions from what we found as well as practices and other beliefs. So they used white sage, smudging, spiritual animals that only close practices use, which we talked about in a previous episode. Gardner's travels picked up a lot of spiritual practices, such as the indigenous people, and claiming those practices as its own. Um, the Wheel of the Year. This is not close, but it's still holidays. So equinoxes, solstices.
Yeah, I wanted to
Um,
talk a little bit on that specifically because I just had done a little bit more research since we had done the research. We're both having problems talking tonight. So the Wheel of the Year that was created for Wiccan beliefs, that's where like you hear about like Yule and Samhain and Ostara and um my brain is like blanking right now. Beltane, Litha. So a lot of those holidays were stolen from different practices. Four of the main ones were Celtic fire festivals, which were celebrated on, like the solstices and the equinoxes. That's kind of like the calendar was the seasonal calendar that the Celtic fire festivals followed. Um, so a lot of the holidays were just kind of moshed together from different practices. It didn't really come from like one specific origin for the holidays. So while those practices weren't closed on like smudging and things like that are just thrown into Wicca, you pick up any intro to Wicca book, you're going to find something about smudging in there, and that's just not meant for you. If you're not indigenous and haven't learned how to do it properly. But the wheel of the year isn't technically closed, but the holidays are stolen. So that's something to be mindful of. And really, if you're going to practice those things, maybe just think about like practicing the ones that would have come from your ancestors and what they would have done rather than the mishmash that is the Wiccan way of celebrating the wheel of the year. I tend to really only celebrate the like spring equinox, the solstices, the fall equinox, and then also Samhain because that's like when the veil is thin. I don't practice too much other whenever it comes to the holidays.
There's a little more research on one and or both of these individuals, Gardner and Crowley. So I'll go on about Mr. Gardner. Um, Even though he was a well-traveled man and learned a lot of the different spiritual beliefs of different groups of people, he really didn't respect these indigenous practices when he created Wicca and appropriated traditions from his travels into what is known as modern witchcraft. Um, Something that is not talked about enough with in regard to Gerald Gardner is the use of sex magic by Gardner. The problem with these rituals is that they were not always done by or with consenting adults, aka they were there were minors. We'll leave it at that. Um, the Great Rite is one ritual where one person takes on the horned god and the other takes on the horned goddess, a male and woman, which is inherently homophobic in itself. And as Gardner took the role of the horned god, as he got older and insisted the goddess must be younger, so the god will always be more powerful than the goddess. And just use your imagination as you will there, because we don't want to, get deep into it. But I hope you guys understand what we're trying to say here. I will let Elle talk about the next part because I think is really important as well.
Yeah, and another thing with that is a lot of people want to claim Wicca as like Christian witchcraft, but it really isn't if you go into the history of it and you look at the rituals that were being done by Gardner and Crowley and like the original books that they were using and their spells that they were using, it really doesn't fall under that. So we're gonna talk about the homophobia in these rituals and also just in Wicca in general. So while in modern times, gays, lesbians, bisexuals, pretty much anyone of any sexual orientation or gender identity have been welcomed into Wicca, their involvement has kind of been besieged with problems because of the notion that gender polarity is necessary for effective magic in the ideals of Wicca. So if, say, you're non-binary and their rituals say that you have to be either a man or a woman, that's already not inclusive because you're following these old ways. And it's also interesting to me because of the fact that, we are an ever-changing thing and witchcraft is ever-changing, and there are some people that are still stuck in the old ways of practicing, but Wicca seems to be a place where it gets really stuck. Gay Wiccans are obviously now challenging the accepted norms of Wiccan practices and belief as a result. Many of the beliefs propagated by Gardner are now being questioned, and there appears to be a greater willingness to experiment with the sexual energies expressed between people of varying persuasions and inclinations, including those who are transgender, identify as androgynous, as well as who are like gay, lesbian, bisexual. Wow. Pansexual, all of those kinds of things. However, those rituals also kind of completely cut out the asexual community whenever it comes to things. Not that every Wiccan is practicing these rituals, but they are a very big part of their history.
So, now let's talk about Aleister Crowley.
Oh, this man is so fun. I could rant about Aleister Crowley for ages.
So, Crowley exhibited some controversial political and social beliefs, such as his interest in Nazism and Marxist Leninism, and his misogyny and racism. Not shocking nor surprising. Much of Crowley's income came from publishing as he continued to write and release books of poetry. He also wrote numerous articles for Vanity Fair, which at the time was edited by his friend Frank Harris. And one of his articles included on the management of blondes and the three great hoaxes of war. Just like that first article alone, very questionable.
Yeah, it's like one of the issues I have with Wicca as a whole too is you have to like witchcraft is so much about like honoring ancestors and honoring like where things came from. And Gardner and Crowley just had such questionable morals as people who are known as the fathers of Wicca that it's like I understand, Wicca has changed with time, but how can you be supporting these people who created it? Because a lot of the rituals are still passed down from the very early days of it. And a lot of those ideas came from people with very questionable moral tendencies.
Big yikes. With that being said, his influence grew out throughout the early to mid 20th century, and his writings drew in more practitioners of dilemma. I probably said that so wrong. He even started his own abbey in 1920, where he and other Thelemites, oh my gosh, lived and worshipped, practicing sex magic and creating art. His hedonistic lifestyle continued, and he developed a significant heroin problem. Needless to say, he was problematic, and his influence on Wicca should be noticed as he also went down the path of practicing sex magic, just like Gardner, and the women there may have not been of age, nor could they consent.
Yeah,
Ah,
there's a lot of information about the ritual specifically with Gardner and like him insisting on women being younger, whereas Crowley, it's a little bit more like, how would I say, alluded to, but not specifically spelled out for, that kind of thing. So, that's like where Wicca came from. It's these two white guys who traveled the world basically stealing other people's practices to create a new practice, which they called themselves the fathers of modern witchcraft. But whenever you think about witchcraft, it's kind of I guess it doesn't really make sense. Like, it's ironic that you're calling it modern witchcraft because witchcraft rituals have been passed down for generations upon generations for hundreds and hundreds of years, even thousands of years for some communities. So to call something modern whenever everything that you took from those people has been passed down for literal generations, long ancestral lines, there's nothing modern about it at all. So let's talk about Wicca in the late 60s, after Gardner and Crowley have passed away and are no longer a part of the influence of it, because this is whenever it like really got big and popular. There were those like smaller covens that they each had that were following it, but this is whenever it kind of like really blew up and took form as what we know today as Wicca and the like modern witch movement, that is the Wiccan religion, because it is a religion. It's not just a belief system. I don't think we said that. The main difference between being a witch and being Wiccan is Wicca is a religion. There are specific things you have to follow to be Wiccan. Whereas to be a witch, it's a spiritual practice. Anyone can be a witch. You, as long as you don't impose unclosed practices like we talked in the last episode, you're good. So the modern founders of the continuation of Wicca were Gavin and Yvonne Frost. They started the school and church of Wicca. So they've wrote and published a number of books. Their book, The Witch's Bible, talks about an initiation ritual that happens at the age of puberty, which is extremely graphic. As I said, spiritually connected goes more in depth on that topic. In short, children who hit puberty within the religion were paired with a sponsor of the opposite gender, whom was a member of the church, and there was a sex magic ritual. As you can assume, without getting too graphic, that is all I'm going to go into with that. That's where the modern practices come from. As you know, that isn't happening in every sector, but there also is a lot of grooming of older people of the Wicca church that is currently happening, which also you see a lot of stories, whether it's on TikTok or, just people speaking out. Even Reddit has some stories on there. You can find them. They're not hard. Just search. Google is free, and you will be able to find someone's horror story about Wicca and being groomed. So let's talk about some current problems in Wicca.
Aside from the continuing of cultural appropriation, there are reports of pedophilia and sexual assault to this day within Wicca. Like Elle said, Google Wicca and sexual assault. The results are horrifying. Again, this is a very problematic religion to say the least. I mean, if you still choose to do it and practice it today, I would recommend that maybe you try to not do that part and maybe focus on the positive aspects of Wicca. Um,
Oh, one thing I didn't put in here is that Wicca really coined the terms black and white magic, which is inherently racist. Because it kind of based off of the idea, the way that it is spoken about in books, is that white magic is all love and light, and Wicca is supposed to be all love and light, right? And then black magic is like anything that is going to affect another person and take away their free will, which there's a lot of indigenous practices where like what they consider as black magic, which the proper term is baneful magic, if you are new and don't understand the difference, where those things are seen as necessary. Like those are practices that are taught in order to, one, help protect yourself, two, return energy that's being sent to you. There's a lot of things that you're taught that can be considered baneful magic. You can do a return to sender that's considered baneful, return all of their negative energy and then add a little spice to it. There's so many ways to make magic baneful, and it is inherently racist to call it black magic because of the fact that a lot of those more baneful practices come from indigenous practices that were stolen. So also be wise about the terms you choose to use, especially if you are continuing on the Wicca journey after hearing all of this and the dark history of it, because there also is just, we've talked about the homophobia, we've talked about the racism now. There's a lot of bigger issues that really are things that you shouldn't be looking at as a witch and thinking are okay if you're all love and light like Wicca is supposed to be.
so, to kind of turn this very serious episode around, let's do astrology forecast time. Astrology, almanac, what else? Oh, I like that addition.
So this is the astrology forecast for July 26th through August 1st. Today, Chiron goes retrograde in the sign of Aries. Be reminded of knowing when to pick your battles and to treat confrontation with grace rather than firing off. There isn't much else going on astrologically on this day or this week. That is the main things. So definitely make sure you are being a little more cautious in the way you are choosing to speak to people, which seems to be a theme for the next couple of weeks.
I feel like even though these are recorded ahead of time, they're always at me. They're always at me. But anywho, now before the podcast episode is over, we're doing my favorite thing we like to call tarot time. Tarot time. Tarot time. Here we are for tarot time.
Ooh, so we have the Queen of Wands. Kind of funny that we talked about not firing off because the Queen of Wands is a very strong, determined character, someone who's very bold, stands on business, very passionate, can be very fiery. So, you've been warned. You're coming in with that energy, and the astrology told you to chill out. Um, it can be good to be very passionate and very strong, but you also at the same time can be overbearing. So definitely just keep that in mind in this coming week. Final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Learn your history if you decide that you are going to practice Wicca openly. Um, Google is free. Use it. Go to your local library. It's probably free. Use it. Don't just, take the first thing you see off TikTok or Google even to, decide that you're going to follow that. As journalists, it is our due diligence to do your research, so use more than one platform. So that's
Yeah.
all I'm going to say on that.
Yes, do your research. I think that's a very good note to end on. Hope y'all have a wonderful and fantastic week. And next week, we will be coming back with an episode on discrimination in spiritual spaces. Another hard hitter.
As always, because we're just smacking you guys with all the hard hitters this I was going to say semester, this season, as if we're in the middle of school. But I mean, I feel like we're learning together, to be honest. Like, I feel like it's not just us teaching you, but we're also learning a lot as well as we do our research with you got for you guys. So we're all in this together. Cue High School Musical. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Sister Sister. Make sure you tune in next time and make sure to follow us on our socials. Peace out.
Bye.